Hi, I'm Keith Ferrazzi. Stay tuned because what we're going to be talking about today is how you are failing yourself as a leader. Stop leading in the way you're leading, and I want you to reach down and make your team extraordinary. Stop leading in a way that makes you feel overloaded, and I want you to share that load with your extraordinary team. They will step up, but you have to step up. I'll see you there.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. I want to thank you for joining us on this episode of Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives. Let me ask you, what do you need to do to up-level your leadership? Will you up-level your leadership by being a more high-performing leader? Yeah, but is that enough? Maybe you'll do it by leading specific individuals. Maybe. But again, is that enough? Is there a more powerful, more effective way? What if there's a way in which your high-performing teams could lead other teams? The question is, how can you do that more effectively? Well, stay tuned because that's exactly what you're going to discover on this show today. Hi, I'm your host, Dov Baron. I am the Dragonist, and I'm here to assist you tapping into the one thing in your business that changes everything by transforming meaning into action. To find out more about what I do and who I am, you can go to dovbaron.com. This episode of Leadership and Loyalty is brought to you in part by our 2-hour live Dragon leadership trainings that are now available to you. Yes, imagine being in a virtual classroom where I personally walk you through the techniques and the strategies that I previously only offered to top CEOs, executives, high-level entrepreneurs, athletes, and entertainers. Well, now you have the opportunity to go over to dovbaron.com, click on that menu bar where it says the 2-hour live training, and join us. And in fact, you'll even get access to some of our past episodes that are there as well, like ethical persuasion, becoming a meaning-driven leader, resilient leadership in a time of chaos, and so many more. dovbaron.com now and secure your seat. Also, remember that you can chat about this episode or any past episode inside of our Facebook and LinkedIn groups. Just go over to Leadership and Loyalty Podcast inside there. Okay, if you're a new listener, new viewer, strap yourself in. We're about to go full Monty. As always, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you tune into podcasts. If you are a regular listener, a big thank you to you for making us the #1 podcast globally for Fortune 500 listeners with a potential reach of 2.5 to 4 million listeners over time for every single show. We're honored and grateful to be cited by Inc.com as the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. All right, let's strip it down and dive right in. Leaders, even leaders who are dedicated to being transformative leaders, have constantly battled for more power in order to make the transformations happen. But what if we've had it all wrong? What if we've actually been making it hard on ourselves? What if there's a way by which high-performing teams could lead other teams? And how could they do that effectively? Well, let's find out, because our guest, our guest on this episode, it's Keith Ferrazzi. Now, Keith Ferrazzi, he is a #1 New York Times best-selling author. He wrote books that you probably heard of called Never Eat Alone, Who's Got Your Back. He's an entrepreneur, founder and chairman of Ferrazzi Greenlight, an executive team coach for some of the most prominent organizations in the world, like the World Bank, Delta Airlines, General Motors, just a couple of small companies there. He's a thought leader, frequent contributor at publications like Forbes, Entrepreneur, Wall Street Journal, Fast Company. And recently, Keith has been at the forefront of remote team transition since his published research, which was done in 2012 to 2015, appeared in the Harvard Business Review. He's here today to assist us in understanding how to genuinely break down silos, transform teams, and reinvent collaboration. So, ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and help me welcome New York Times bestselling author of a new book called Leading Without Authority and the creator of a new word called co-elevation, Mr. Keith Ferrazzi.
Holy cow. You sure got a lot in there. Do we have any time for the interview is the
Yeah, we
question.
can do a little bit of an interview now.
Awesome.
I'm
Awesome.
so
Dov,
glad to have you here, mate. It's
what a
a
pleasure.
real pleasure, and it's a real honor. I know that you are a busy guy. You're in demand. Everybody wants to talk to you, and because what you do is significant and different. But where we always want to start is in this age of influential leaders where every man and his dog's an expert. I'm always want to know who influences the influencers. So here's my question to you. Who is it that we might not know and maybe not even consider who's been a major influence on you or your leadership, even if we don't know who they are?
Sure. And look, I'll answer that in a couple of ways. And one of them, I want to look nostalgically back to my father. And the reason is my old man was an unemployed steelworker from Pittsburgh. And I sat at his dinner table when he had brilliant ideas as just a steelworker about how his plant could be better. But back in those days, many of your listeners, I'm sure, weren't alive even then in the 70s in Pittsburgh, but the steel industry was crumbling around us.
Mm-hmm.
International steel was kicking our butts. And the leadership was failing that industry. We had higher priced, lower quality steel. And here were people like my father that had points of view that because of hierarchical authority, the managers didn't want to hear it, right? They just said, keep your head down, Pete, get your job done. And by the way, don't work too fast because if you do, it'll make me look bad because it looks like I'm not managing the rest of the guys well, right? And that's true.
Yeah,
and
I believe you.
I then grew up and made a commitment that I would someday make sure that I saved families' jobs by doing something in the realm of corporate transformation. And that's the weirdest thing for an 8-year-old to commit to.
I was going to say, like,
right? But that's what I did. And
I think we're from the same family, the weird children squad.
I know. Well, I was the only person. First of all, I was the first kid that ever went to school from my family. And I ended up going to Yale University. And I was the only kid from Yale to move back to hometown and get into manufacturing. And I started learning about things that were rising at the time that actually came in from Japan called total quality management. Mm-hmm. At the essence of TQM, there was a guy named Deming, and who was really very much focused. Many of your listeners probably don't know about Deming. Deming was the father of the quality movement that basically awakened companies to realize that the people down at the coalface of the work knew more than you did. And therefore we need to unleash their wisdom, their insights, their power. And mostly it was around process improvement. But I learned about this from General Motors, who brought all of their suppliers up. And I went up and I learned about all of this. Well, I saw the value of it when my father by the time had passed away, but I saw the value of it with other workers at our plant that I was working at. Mm-hmm. And I have studied that ever since. How do you unleash the power of the people in an organization to transform the organization? And what I've done more recently in the last 20 years is studied how we as leaders fail too often, and could, though, unleash the power of our team to transform the enterprise. Because we, as you introduced us, we spend so much time focused as leaders on our vision, on our strategy, on individual accountability, on management, on process. We totally under-curate what are team competencies and what is our role as a leader to make the team better. And that's what we're here to talk about today. So I would say my old man and Edwards Deming.
Yeah, I remember reading about Deming years and years ago. That's fascinating because I don't even think I've heard that name in so long.
But you were looking for somebody obscure, so I grabbed one obscure.
And that's a really good one. So you brought it up there. What were you like as a kid?
I think, first of all, I'm an introvert. And people will believe that as much as if anybody asked you if you were an introvert and if you said you were, because my suspicion is nobody would think that you are, and you probably aren't, but I am. My gregarious nature is something that I use as a tool for success because I was born, as I said, poor, very unemployed as a family. And if I didn't build better relationships and I didn't learn how to crack the code of building relationships, there was no nepotism going to help me. I had to create my own, and I created it through relationships, right? And that's what I wrote my book, Never Eat Alone, about. And as a kid, I was just earnestly trying to do my best to get out of the poverty that we were in. My dad used to show me his hands, and he would, in the lines of his hands, he'd say, there'd be black rings, and he would scrub them with gasoline. He couldn't get them out. And he'd say, Keith, I don't want you to have to work this hard. So I had an earnest desire to fulfill my father's wishes, go to a good school, study hard, etc. And I was always trying to dissect what success looked like, because I didn't have any models. I had to seek it out. I had, it's like the rich dad, poor dad philosophy. Yeah. My dad had earnestness, he had hard work, and I had that. I'll say that one other thing is I didn't feel I deserved to be in the room. As a kid going to rich schools, I had a lot of insecurity. I felt that that I was not as good as the rich kids. And when they reinforced that by making fun of my clothes, the shoes that I had, etc., I felt even worse. And I've spent a lifetime as a self-professed learner and a seeker, because digging out from underneath insecurity is a lifetime journey, and that tape that plays in the back of your head that you're not good enough, that you need to overcompensate, that you need to brag. Like, I don't know about you, but many people who are introverts feeling insecure, they shudder into small. Mm-hmm. I do the opposite. I go into big. I protect myself by being big, by bragging, by etc. And that's how I spent my young life. So you would have seen a brash, audacious kid underneath scared to death. And that's something I work on all the time not to be. And it's, I don't know, your viewers will have to judge whether or not I'm doing a good job of it.
It's really, I think that's really quite fascinating and insightful, Keith, because I think that there's a lot of propaganda about what a leader is. And part of that is the charismatic extrovert. Yeah. And I think that you are clearly, I've seen you speak, you're clearly charismatic, and you can clearly be extrovert, as can I. I am nobody, including my wife, by the way. I've been married 23 years. My wife doesn't believe I'm an introvert, but I am. And yeah. Can be very charismatic. But the reason I became those things was because I was so freaking insecure.
Amen.
Right. So, and I grew up in abject poverty. It's like you and I are twins from different nations, grew up in an industrial place and all those kinds of things. And, I remember saying on stage back in the early 90s that Tony Robbins said, find somebody successful and do what they do, model it. And I was like, yeah, what if you don't know anybody?
Yeah, exactly.
Because I remember saying, I don't know anybody who's successful.
You'll love
what am
this.
I supposed to model? So I did the anti-model.
Yeah.
I looked at what they were doing that didn't
did
work,
the opposite.
And went, okay, I got to do something else.
When I was in 5th grade, my dad had talked this headmaster of a local private school into getting me in there. And I had never known anybody other than steel workers or ditch diggers or coal miners. That's who I knew. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's all I knew.
Yeah.
And one of my classmates' dad was a lawyer. His name was George Love, and the parents was George and the son was George. And I asked my friend in 5th grade whether or not I could stay on the bus and get off at the next bus stop if his dad was picking him up, and meet his father and ask his father if someday he could come to our place for dinner, because I wanted to meet somebody who didn't work with their hands. Right. Wow. And so the same thing that you're talking about, you just, you do your best to find the models and the role models. Right. I'll say something. This happened to me just this morning. And, I don't know, Dove, you have a very successful business. I've got a successful business. We're all, trying to figure out what those businesses look like today in a, post-pandemic and I wouldn't say post-pandemic in a pandemic riddled world. I was struggling this morning, and I had a team that's been failing. And the way I was trying to solve it was I had a relatively senior level individual, and I decided to double down and hire another individual to partner with that person at equal compensation. So instead of firing somebody, because I really believed in his capability and his heart, I added another individual to the team. And I said, the two of you really need to work together and figure out how your competencies work. I don't mind spending a little extra on the two of you together, because I know that we could have 10x in terms of our return if you really figured out a team.
Right.
And it wasn't working. And I had to think of this morning about how to have that dialogue with them that didn't crush them and make them feel like shit about themselves, excuse my language, for the next week. And at the same time, I had to be I felt I needed to be authentic and transparent. And I was really heartbroken at how to have this conversation. And I led with my vulnerability. And I actually teared up in the conversation and my struggle for how to communicate to them. And I let them know that I was struggling with how to communicate how I was feeling and whether I was feeling I was getting a return on investment from their team and what I felt they were missing. And I think I'm proud of how that went down. An old me, a younger me, would have led with stern, critical direction. Yeah. Maybe even a bit of heat, because in the back of my head, as many entrepreneurs have, in the back of my head, I go to scarcity. Even though I'm successful today, I still feel like I could tomorrow be that kid who couldn't afford, rent in the summer while he was doing his summer internship at Yale. Like I still feel that that's where I could be. Yeah. And that brings heat into my leadership. And there's no place for heat in leadership. And yet many entrepreneurs still have authority and control and passion that turns into frustration, that could be anger and even temper, God forbid. But none of those things work today in the new environment. So, what I'm excited about getting to chat about your team here, your community, is how we can step off of our podiums and start having a dialogue with our team members about rising them up, moving from overload on our part to shared load on their part, and to really teach them how to be better team members with each other. Yeah. And we have 8 attributes that we for 20 years have been measuring that are the earmarks of high performing teams. And, we could either march through those or just chat about a few of them. But by the way, you're a big celebrant. Inc. magazine celebrates you a lot. The new managing editor there, Scott's asked me to keynote his big Inc. 5000 event this year. Wow. Trying to help him do what I'm talking about, which is to move this authoritative central leadership style into a recognition of much more humility and vulnerability and inviting the team to step up. Because, and I'll end with this comment, we spend so much time in our heads thinking, my team's not stepping up, and we're not laying the table for them to, we're not laying the buffet for them to come to the table. And that's our job as leaders.
I think that's a great point, because as much as we all understand the time of commanding control, when I say we all, but most of us conscious leaders understand the time of command and control leadership is done.
Intellectually,
exactly. Thank you. It's intellectual. And I think that we still strive maybe to do it better, but we're still doing it. And this is one of the things that I found interesting, because, you and I talked in a previous conversation about, Leading Without a Title and, all those other books that have written about this. And your book, your brand new book, which is Leading Without Authority, is actually a little different than that. And I want to make that very clear distinction, that this is not about what you might think it's about. This is about, as I said, your new word, co-elevation. Talk to us about the new book, because it's about teams leading teams, and that's different than, oh, well, okay, you're now the CEO of garbage. I mean,
exactly. And by the way, let me just tell your community, this man works his butt off for you. in order for me to get in front of you, the fact that I was a #1 New York Times bestselling author, the fact that I have been serving some of the most prestigious teams in the world, he did not give a damn. He interrogated the heck out of me. The very first time he wrung me dry, interrogating the heck out of me. First of all, he had done his homework. He saw the title and he said, I'm going to do my research. He did his research. He called bullshit on me. He like run me through a ringer. So I just want to let you know, this man doesn't just show up. There's a lot of people who run podcasts who show up and dial it in, and they might be good and they may be charismatic, but I have never had a podcast leader be so attentive to levels of detail and research and hard work on your behalf. So I just want to go on record as saying that wasn't, by the way, it was like my first proctology exam, I have to tell you. But that said,
it made you cringe a little. Well, that's great. Well, thank you.
But it wasn't easy, but we got through it. So here we are. So let me talk a little bit about the difference. So I have been practicing this idea that I don't think leaders are getting enough out of their teams. And if you talk to leaders, our data shows it. We have a research institute, and our research institute has said that only 1 out of 5 teams claim that they're a dream team.
Right.
Okay. So that's interesting. 20% of teams say they're a dream team. I think that's sad. And I think we need to have a higher hurdle or higher threshold for what success is. Yes. So I want to aim to being a dream team. And I'll define what a dream team is. A dream team is a team that's deeply committed to the mission, right? But also is committed to each other. And that team is not looking for 10% improvement, but for looking for 10x improvement. Dov, I don't know if you've ever met my buddy, Peter Diamandis, from the X Prize, but Peter has taught me over the years, I'm on his board of directors. Peter has taught me over the years that being exponential doesn't take more time than being incremental. It takes a different mindset.
Right.
And the mindset so what I've done for Peter, and I'm his team's coach, by the way, what I've done for Peter and what I've done for organizations looking to be exponential is what are the ways in which you can be exponential? And the answer is you might get lucky and be Steve Jobs, to be so brilliant in your own head that you can be the defining character that defines everything. Or you can be the kind of leader like Mary Barra at General Motors, who lifts her team up to be partners with each other and her in the definition of a new future, right? So the ability to be the kind of a leader that lifts a team up to meet you and then has the team look at each other, because traditional leadership holds every member accountable for success. Co-elevating leadership assumes that the team can hold each other accountable too. That is a huge shift, because immediately I think about the teams I'm coaching today, whereas there are some teams that when I start working with them, they're very deferential to the leader, and they have what I call good old school accountability. They never miss a number.
Sure.
They always miss it. They are always on a deadline, right? Old school accountability. But when you ask them to redefine something, to go to the next level, they fall apart because they don't know how to lean on each other. Because the way they've gotten here is maximizing individuality. The way they're going to break through 10x is squeezing, challenging each other, bringing different perspectives to each other. Where the head of product that has there's one company I'm working with is an internet bank where they've got traditional bankers and new technologists. And before we started, they had very different points of view, and they were maximizing what they were doing. One was the old bankers were maximizing the risk group. The new technologists were maximizing the platform, but they were never pushing each other and co-elevating to come up with a brand new product which served the banking rules, but blew away the millennials looking to bank in a new way.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
I do.
And that's not digging in and fighting about your point of view. That's co-creating a different level of success and co-elevating by, I call it teaming out. The org chart looks like a network today, not boxes.
Right. And I know that that's a very important piece in what you're doing around this networking. one of the things that I find very interesting about what you've been talking about and what's in the book is that the approach that I saw in there was a synergistic approach. It was not competitive, but synergistic, where 1 + 1 = 11 versus 1
Amen.
+ 1 = 2. And the, one of the things I've written a whole big piece I'm working on right now around diversity in boards. And it's talking about the importance of embracing people with a different point of view, not because it's politically correct, but because it's an advantage. It's a massive advantage to hear something you've never thought of, because that person's coming at it from a completely different view. And one of the analogies I give all the time is, I'll do this with my clients when I'm coaching teams or CEOs, and I'll say, what's the problem? Tell me what the problem is. And they'll tell me, and I'll say, okay, here's the thing I want you to do. I want you to either think about it this way, or if you can't think about it this way, go find one, which is actually my preference. And they go, well, what is it? I go, whatever the problem is, I want you to think about it like a choreographer. And they go, what do you mean? This is, we're in this industry. I know. Think about it like a choreographer. Right? And, well, I don't know. Well, okay, if you think about it like a boxer. Now think about it like, and so it's just to get your brain.
People to look at things from different perspectives. And so I totally love that, particularly if you're coaching an executive. But what's so powerful is you on your team, you have the choreographer, you have the boxer.
That's my point.
Right?
Exactly.
And that's your point.
Yeah, that is exactly my point. That your people have skills, have ways of looking at things that you've shoved them into in order to be part of the org. Yeah. And what I love about what you're saying, Keith, is let's strip away that and find out what's underneath there, because this person you've got in HR or you've got in sales or you've got in marketing may have an incredible point of view that you don't see inside of the form. And what I loved about what you're doing in this co-elevation is like, hold on, tell us what we don't know about you that you could add to this. And I think that is what's profoundly better.
So there's two elements to that, right? Sure. One is the awakening that it's valuable.
Yes.
And I call that a recontracting. We have social norms on our team that dictate how we behave. The social norm of we wait for our leader to tell us what to do. That's a poor social norm. Versus proactivity. That would be a different social norm. There's a social norm that says, listen, I'm going into this meeting and we all stay out of each other's shorts. None of us critiques each other because we're just trying to get in and out without looking like a fool in front of the leader. So we're going to go in, we're all going to report out. We're not going to say anything. Now, nobody ever says that. Maybe they do, but nobody ever says that, but that's how they behave.
It's inferred.
As a result, by the way, 71% of teams say that they do not feel comfortable speaking up in a room, in a meeting. 71% of teams say that they cannot challenge or speak up in a room. So if I don't know any leader that intellectually would appreciate the fact that she or he knew that his team was not courageous enough to speak up in a room. If just intellectually, right? Yet your behavior as a leader is more than likely stopping people from speaking up in a room on so many different dimensions.
I want to stop you there for a minute, because that is powerful and it's vitally important. I want people to really grasp that you will be upset. What Keith was just saying there is you'd be upset to know that your people are afraid to speak up in the room or uncomfortable to speak up in the room. And yet your behavior is guaranteeing that they can't.
That's right.
Even though you may think, as you listen to us, well, that's not me. I really encourage that. Well, maybe you do.
Yeah.
Maybe you don't. And can you stop with that for a minute and just go to that level of vulnerability with yourself and ask yourself that for a minute. Is it possible that as open and vulnerable and wonderful and conscious as I think I am, that I may be actually shutting my people down or making that not possible or not comfortable for them to speak up? I think that's a profoundly important thing. Thank you.
So let's take this to the next step of action for your team.
Thank you.
So what I'm holding here in front of my hand is a diagnostic tool that we've created over 20 years. And you and I are talking about something that I call this candor, truth telling, speaking up, challenging, etc.
Yeah.
There's two questions that we have in our poll that we've statistically refined over 20 years. Here is a simple question that I would ask you to ask your team. All team members openly speak their minds during meetings. Have all of your team in a room and say, hey, listen, there's this thing called candor. And I've been told by Dove and some guy he had on his podcast that candor is important, and that if I'm not getting candor out of this room, then I'm not being a good leader. So I'm curious. I want all of you to write down on a piece of paper 1 to 5. 1 means heck no. All team members do not openly speak their minds during meetings. A 5 means heck yes. We say everything we're thinking. We never leave a meeting and the real conversation happens. Right? We never leave a meeting and talk behind each other's backs. Right? What do you think the answer normally is? We've done thousands of teams in this diagnostic. The answer is typically 2.2. Right? 2.2 on a scale of 1 to 5 on this particular questions of speaking in a room openly. So if that's where we are, now we've unveiled the truth. Mm-hmm. So that's the first step, which is the awakening and the awareness that this is where we are. And this is what I call recontracting. The next step is for you to say to your team, and by the way, before we leave, I'm going to get this diagnostic for your team. I'll tell your team I'll tell your community where they can get this diagnostic.
Fabulous.
And what I want you to then say to your team is, okay, is this acceptable, or we'd like to see something different? And have the conversation. And look, I guarantee you, I know the answer. The answer will be, we'll want to see something different. But now the question is, can you coach them as a team leader to do something different? And let me explain what you could do.
Right.
I give you 3 simple practices. One of them is set your timer in the middle of a meeting for halfway through and say to the team, okay, alarm just went off, pausing for a second. What's not being said? What's not being said? What is in your heads that should be said that we're not talking about? What's the pink elephant? What's the challenge? Where are we maybe missing something? Now, what you will hear when you say that out loud is crickets. You'll hear the fan in the background, right? That's what you'll hear. That's it. Fine. So here's what you do. You can either wait for the dead pause until somebody speaks up. You could call on somebody directly and say, hey, Jane, you're usually pretty candid. What do you think's not being said? And I want to celebrate you no matter what it is. And then celebrate that person, right? But here's the other thing you can do. In a remote world like this, you can push a button on Zoom or Microsoft Teams. You could take everybody in the room into a small breakout room. I don't know, most people don't use breakout rooms, and this is a superfood for successful psychological safety. Because the reason they're not speaking up is they're not psychologically safe. You've not conditioned them to be safe, and they don't have the contract of speaking up and challenging in a room. So you send them in the breakout rooms and say, I'm going to call you back in 5 minutes. You're all in rooms of 2. When you come back, I want you all to have an answer. What's not being said? Now they've got an assignment. In small rooms, they will speak the truth. In small rooms, they'll be courageous. When they come back, we only find that the degradation of candor is about 15%. Why? Because in the room, they spoke truth, and they will look like cowards if when they go back, they water it down too much.
Yeah. Great.
So the psychological commitment they made in the room, they now they have a little tribe, and they don't want to violate their tribe. The other thing is, now, they will lie to you if you shut them down or blow up.
Of course.
So this is where you as a leader have to work hard. So that's just one little practice that if you've got a low score on candor, you could do that little practice. I've got 5 or 6 others you could get into if you wanted. I give you another one, which is, I call it bulletproofing. Have your team sequentially report what the status is that they're working on. So instead of a report out, which is a traditional, here's what I'm working on, and then it's done. Here's the format of the kind of reports that I ask my teams to do. Tell them to give a report for 5 minutes of what they've just done in the last period of time, 5 minutes talking about where they're struggling, and 5 minutes saying what they're planning to do for the next week or 2, whatever the next sprint is, so to speak. Then everybody goes into small rooms again, and they are what's called bulletproofing in service of the person who just shared their report out, which normally we just go into the next report out. But now I want you to pause, and in the report out, I want the small group to answer the following 3 questions. What challenge might we offer this person of a risk they're not seeing? What bold innovation could we give this person? Could be a crazy ass innovation that nobody will actually do, but it's something that might spur their thinking. And what offer of help could you offer this person based on what you've just heard? Could be resources, could be your time, whatever. That is a superfood of every attribute you want your team to be. You want your team to be helpful to each other. Yes. You want them to challenge each other. You want them to give each other bold innovations. Why haven't they? Because you as a leader have not orchestrated your meetings in a way that have given time for that. You orchestrate your meetings with individual report outs that never give time for the bulletproofing superfood.
Right.
Such a simple change. In a remote environment, it's easier because you can go in and out of breakout rooms so easily.
Yes.
So we have been spending years, and this is where we spent $2 million of research around high-performing remote teams. And now we've got a new study called Go Forward to Work, where we're publishing the best practices of the future of work that have been evolving today. My commitment to you is I'll help you do the recontracting, which you can download the recontracting guide at my name, keithferrazzi.com/loyalty. It's just for Dove's team. It's just for Dove's community.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And I'm also giving away our free course. We've never been in the course business before, and I'm not very good at it because I'm always giving it away. So for us, it's something that I wanted to offer your team, and you can get all of that stuff at keithferrazzi.com/loyalty. But what I want your community to do is to start to realize that they need to restart recontracting the social contract among their team, and then start applying in their meetings different practices that bring it to life.
Fantastic. That's amazing. There's so much more I want to get into here. Like I said, I want to take this a lot further. There's a lot more to go into here. There's so much more depth around what it is you're doing and how you're doing it, and particularly fascinated by this research that I think you had your psychic underpants on in 2012 around how to do remote work, because, you know, maybe you were speaking to the powers that be, the Illuminati, whoever it might have been, and you found out, oh, remote work's going to be big, so let's put a couple of $1 million into the research. However, we are coming towards the end of this first episode. This is going to be a 2-part interview with Keith Ferrazzi, and we're going to come back to that. I want to thank Keith for being with us for part 1. We're going to be back in part 2. And for you, dear listener, remember, you can find out more about Keith by simply going to his name, which is Keith Ferrazzi, KEITHFERRAZZI, I was going to say Z, ZZI.com. So keithferrazzi.com, and if you go to /loyalty, there's all kinds of good stuff there for you. You can find Keith on Twitter, you can find him on Instagram and all kinds of places. But we're gonna come back to him in part 2. Until then, I just want you to remember that you can also chat and hang out with other conscious leaders about this episode or any past episodes inside of our LinkedIn and Facebook groups. Just look for the Leadership and Loyalty podcast. And remember, it doesn't matter how successful you are. If your employees and your customers don't understand what gives your company meaning, you're only working at a fraction of your capability. To find out how you can hire me, Dov Baron, as a speaker, a leadership strategist for yourself or your organization, go to dovbaron.com, because unified meaning, or as we call it, finding your dragonfire, is the one single monolithic difference between greatness and mediocrity in individuals and companies. So I want to thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know, and I hope you come back for part 2. Until next time, stay curious, my friend. Stay curious about how your teams can lead your teams and how you can stop fighting for power that you don't need to have. Till next time, this is Dov Baron. I'm out.